and welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly, where we discuss the latest in Israel's geopolitical developments. I'm Aaron Porras, and with me today in the studio are Dr. Martin Sherman, the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, and Ilan Baruch, the former Israeli ambassador to South Africa. Now, today we'll be talking about the recently ratified Palestinian reunification deal and how that might look going forward, and the ongoing moves that the United States is making against Iran. Now, first we turn to the tiff between the United States and Iran over what President Trump says is Iran's violation of the spirit of the nuclear agreement. Iran, in response, has stated emphatically that there is little to nothing the United States can do about it.
In addition, we must not allow Iran to obtain nuclear weapons. The Iranian regime supports terrorism and exports violence, bloodshed, and chaos across the Middle East. That is why we must put an end to Iran's continued aggression and nuclear ambitions. They have not lived up to the spirit of their agreement.
So Iran has come out, President Rouhani has said that it would take, not even 10 Trumps could change anything about this deal. So what do you say to that? I'm going to start with you, Dr. Sherman.
Well, I think we've reached a stage where there are no really good options. To be honest, as a political scientist and Iran as a sovereign nation, Iran basically has the absolute right to pursue nuclear weapons, in theory. But on the other hand, in practice, Western nations, led by the United States, have an absolute duty to prevent them from reaching that goal. And I think what's happened over the last 2 years or so is that we've seen the falling apart of the Obama agreement, or Obama administration's led agreement, and this was entirely expected, because I think it's unreasonable to expect a regime like Iran, which has proved its dishonesty and its cunningness time and time again, to expect them to adhere to the agreement. And it was an agreement that a priori was impossible to verify.
So I want to go to you, Ambassador. If the whole world is saying that Iran is adhering to the agreement, though, how do we know they aren't?
I think that it's really preposterous, the Trump statement about the spirit of the agreement. What is it, spirit of the agreement? I mean, how do you measure the spirit of the agreement?
By not supporting terror, by not...
No, the agreement has to do exclusively.
That was the entire folly of the agreement, to try and isolate the nuclear component from the rest of Iran's behavior.
That is a different question. But the agreement is being adhered to...
How do you know? How do you know?
The IAEA
is checking. The sites, no, they're not checking.
They are checking.
Because they're sites that they haven't got access to. So how can they check?
No, they have no sites that they have no access to.
No, that's not true.
No.
They have no access to military sites.
And now the US is going to lose heavily if they really pull out of the agreement, because this will be a rift with the rest of the 5+1. And that will also give Europe a huge advantage over the US.
And what?
For example, Iran signed a contract with Boeing for 100 aircraft. Yeah, they will just drop it.
So in other words, what you're saying is that because we've lifted the sanctions, we should lift the sanctions. It doesn't matter whether Iran allows inspections or doesn't allow inspections, or whether it has a sunset clause that it can produce nuclear weapons. The whole agreement was folly from the beginning. And what we're seeing now is that Iran, under the umbrella of this agreement and with the money, because this agreement did three things: that empowered Iran militarily, it entrenched the regime politically, and enriched Iran economically. And so Iran now, under the so-called pretense of adhering to this agreement, which is, of course, completely disconnected from all the other mischief that Iran is doing, is moving inevitably closer to nuclear power. And soon the world will be faced with a situation far more serious than the one that it could have faced in 2015 when Iran was on the ropes and could have been forced to.
My question.
Wait a minute. He cannot simply domineer the time here. If the U.S. will pull out of this agreement signed by the previous administration, the U.S. will lose heavily on credibility in the world when signing agreements. Yeah. Because there is no reason, and President Trump himself actually confirmed twice that the Iranians are standing by the agreement, and now what he is going to say is that the spirit of the agreement is violated. What is it, spirit of the agreement?
What I was going to ask earlier is exactly that, because you raised a good point earlier that the agreement, lacked addressing the fact that Iran supports terror. It doesn't have that in there, so they could be adhering to the agreement. Missiles. And that was a mistake of the United States for, I suppose, for signing that agreement and for allowing that to not have been included. So therein lies the question. Why is Trump attacking this, saying they're not adhering to the spirit of the agreement? Wouldn't it be better to just say, we're pulling out and we want a better one?
Well,
fix it or nix it.
That's what he might do. And if you can fix it and improve it and increase the inspection ability on Iran, that may be the route to go. But at the moment, unless Iran is faced with a credible, coercive threat, it will carry on doing what it's doing.
But then I also want to hear, because
I want to remind you of the year 2003, when the U.S. went into war with Iraq, based on the false pretense that Iraq is developing nuclear capacity. And who was really encouraging the Americans to go for war? Not else but Mr. Netanyahu. In a column in the Wall Street Journal, he was urging the Americans to stand by their president and go for war. And by that, they removed the barrier between Iran and the Near East.
Are you suggesting that the Netanyahu government is somehow pushing...
He was not in government at the time. But I suggest that Americans, short-sightedly, were interfering with war in the Middle East and were actually pulling against their own interests and ours.
But you brought up the example of 2003 and how Netanyahu allegedly had, a say with that move to go into Iraq. So are you suggesting that that sort of same thing is happening now, where Netanyahu is coercing the United States against Iran?
I'm suggesting that we have to be very careful not to lead to a chaotic situation whereby a military campaign will be necessitated. We have to be very, very careful. And the Iranians, by now, are, according to the IAEA, are standing by their commitment, and we have to go with it.
Well, the atomic energy testimony is very questionable, because there are many sites that they can't access. If they're suspicious sites, they have to give a long warning. And what we were promised before the agreement was signed was inspections anywhere, anytime. And now what you've got is delayed and managed inspections, if you're allowed to inspect them at all. But it's totally impractical to think that you can inspect Iran for a decade over that whole massive country, where you have very few inspectors and many Iranians backed by an army. The whole agreement is a farce. The whole agreement is a farce. And in the end, the free world will be faced with a very difficult situation.
So what are you suggesting be done? Like, first and foremost, what do you think the next move should be?
Let's say two things. For Iran to be prevented from attaining nuclear weapons, it must be faced with a credible coercive option. It must know that if it doesn't de-weaponize its nuclear program, but its sites will be bombed, its dams will be bombed, its power stations will be bombed.
So you're saying we threaten them militarily, which is what Rex Tillerson was arguing.
And that has to be credible.
That could also have
what Israel has to do, of course, but that's what Chamberlain said with Germany. And this is a rerun, only worse. What Israel has to do is build up its strength, including its submarine fleet, which brings us to the argument: do you want 3 submarines too little, or one too little, or 3 too many?
Ambassador, I wanted to hear your response, actually.
Well, the Chamberlain argument is coming up, and I think we should rid ourselves of this nonsense. Iran is not Germany, and 2010 is not 1938, and the ambitions of Iran are nothing compared with the ambitions of Germany at the time. We have to abide by the Americans need to abide by the agreement. It is very fortunate that the world, 6 powers, signed an agreement with Iran, and with the backing of the Security Council of the United Nations, and we should stand by it, and maybe one day we will have an opportunity to see Iran in an entirely different perspective, because there is actually no reason for Iran to be in animosity, neither with us nor with the Americans. And this setup
Maybe someone should tell them that.
All right, well, with that, we have to move on. Fatah and Hamas have officially announced their unity for the good of all Palestinians, but is it sustainable, and what does it mean for Israel, who is squeezed between the 2 Palestinian territories of Gaza and the West Bank? For now, both the Palestinian Authority, who has assumed administrative control over Gaza, and Israel are making their voices heard.
ونحن هنا بين أهلنا وبين أبناء شعبنا الأبطال الأسطوريين الذين تحدوا الحصار الإسرائيلي الجائر والذين عبروا سنوات الانقسام. عقدت هذه الجلسة الأسبوعية لمجلس الوزراء في جو كامل من التوافق والاتفاق والإصرار من الجميع على رأب الصدع الوطني وعلى إنهاء الانقسام وعلى استعادة الوحدة الوطنية وعلى توحيد المؤسسة الوطنية.
כל מי שמדבר על תהליך שלום צריך קודם כל לדבר על כך שצריך להכיר במדינת ישראל, מדינת העם היהודי. שלום מחייב הכרה במדינת ישראל, מדינת הלאום של העם היהודי. אנחנו לא מעוניינים בפיוס מדומה שבו הפלגים הפלסטינים מתפייסים אחד עם השני על חשבון הקיום שלנו. ועל כן אנחנו מצפים לראות 3 דברים. 1, הכרה במדינת ישראל. 2, פירוק הזרוע הצבאית של החמאס. ו3, ניתוק הקשר עם איראן שקוראת להשמדתנו. אלה דברים בסיסיים, אנחנו עומדים עליהם.
Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Ambassador. How significant is this meeting? Because this isn't the first reunification talks. How significant is this one?
Well, first of all, let me make a point here. In your introduction, you said Israel is squeezed between 2 Palestinian territories. That sounds a bit bizarre. I mean, a superpower squeezed between 2 tiny little enclaves with no military force, no
geographically, it's quite accurate.
No, it is really well. It's not. It is in between. It's not squeezed. Let's say this way. Secondly, we see now for the first time a serious attempt coming mainly from Hamas to change the trajectory of the political action and go for a political rather than a military play. We need to be very careful with Hamas. Hamas is not monolithic. There is an armed wing, and we have characters in Hamas that are known for the terror-inclined action. Yeah. But at the same time, we know that no peace agreement between Israel and Palestine will ever pick up unless Hamas is on board. And we will need to see some form of reconciliation, and hopefully it's the right form. And so we need to be vigilant, we need to look very carefully, but definitely not destroy it as Mr. Netanyahu is trying to do right from the start.
I mean, as devil's advocate, it doesn't leave very many options because, as you said, if Hamas needs to be a part of that deal, no matter how we look at it, but Hamas has emphatically stated that they have no intention of recognizing any of the previous agreements with Israel already, what are the options to eradicate Hamas?
No, I mean, things are changing. Hamas is also has invested in rephrasing its base convictions on relations with Israel. And what we are hoping to do, to see, is a quartet, three gate principles respected by Hamas as a pre-move to serious reconciliation with, so that a joint government can actually move into the negotiations room with sufficient support and engage with us.
All right, I'd like to hear your response.
Well, I think what's happened is exposed the short-sightedness and the silliness of Israel's policy towards the Palestinians. As you know, and the viewers know, I'm a fierce opponent of Palestinian statehood. But once you acknowledge that the Palestinians deserve statehood, you can't determine, you can't dictate who represents them. And as long as Israel is locked into its commitment to the two-state paradigm, to Palestinian statehood, there are going to be no good options unless you relate to the Palestinians as they relate to themselves, not as prospective peace partners, but as implacable enemies. Israel will not be able to define or formulate a long-term strategy that is consistent with its long-term existence. Now, I would be very, very loath to accept my interlocutor's prescription of the weakness of the Palestinian entity, because the danger today facing Israel is not large-scale cataclysmic invasion by Arab armies. It's ongoing attrition. And we've seen what's happened in the north with the arsenal amassed there by Hezbollah, which with 100,000 rockets that can reach any Israeli population center, the threat of attack tunnels. We've seen that happening in Gaza on a slightly smaller scale. Now all we need to do is have that in the east overlooking Tel Aviv, the Trans-Israel Highway, the Ben Gurion Airport, and Greater Tel Aviv. So negotiations with the Palestinians can go nowhere, and if Israel wants to formulate a coherent and cogent policy that will allow future existence, it has to extricate itself from any kind of acceptance of Palestinian statehood.
Please.
I think Dr. Sherman is a proponent of Jordan is Palestine.
No, well, I don't object to it, but not necessarily. I don't object to Jordan as Palestine.
Yes, and
but
I suggest that we go back to the basics. Between the river and the coast of the Mediterranean, we have 13 million people, roughly half and half. Mm-hmm. And
much closer to 65-35.
Well, even, let's say...
But I agree with you. I agree with
half and half. And because if you take the 2 million or Palestinians living in Israel itself, you have half and half. There is no way, and people need to understand that one half can subjugate the other into submission.
I agree with you.
And so they will need to have, based on equal right, Palestinians will have to have an opportunity for liberty in dignity.
Do you have that in Gaza?
No, they don't have it in Gaza.
With this reconciliation,
we don't have that in Gaza.
Well, with
exactly,
this reconciliation, could they gain some more...
Do they have that in the West Bank? In Judea and Samaria? Really? They've had elections for 12 years.
The equal right for self-determination is not sliced into parts. It is one Palestine, which is of the two enclaves squeezing Israel in between. And that is what matters. We need to come to the point.
When was there any political entity or unity between Gaza and Judea and Samaria? When? It's an artificial construct that the Israeli left has produced. But
well, I ask any Palestinian, and he will say this is one. Actually, this is one because it was all part of bigger Palestine, which is the entire territory.
Southern Syria.
So as a result of the 48 war, we were left with two territories separated from each other, one under Egyptian rule, one under Jordanian rule, and those two territories are by agreement with Israel.
Israel has made many stupid agreements. I'm a non-observant Jew. So what I'm saying is not motivated by religious fervor. But I'm a political scientist. I can tell you as a political scientist that there is no way that you can divide the land between the river and the sea, between two sovereigns, especially the kind of sovereignty that the Jews and the Palestinians represent, and reach a long-term stable configuration. There is no way. It's a waste of time trying it. We've tried it for a quarter of a century. So many people have died. So many people have been maimed. So many people have suffered trauma and tragedy, chasing this ridiculous, preposterous, pernicious ideal of a Palestinian state. What has to happen for two state proponents to have the intellectual integrity to say, we were wrong?
Yes, we were wrong. We were wrong. We should have given the Palestinians their statehood a long time ago.
And have a mega Gaza overlooking Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion Airport. Yeah, great idea. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, you know, Gaza.
Right, well, let's look at a more potentially optimistic vote, because realistically, with the facts that are on the ground, they are having unity talks right now. So if they have a unity government and Abbas manages to say, you know, hey, we're in charge now. We're in charge over Gaza. So yes, we're going to allow security cooperation with the Israelis. Could that not help? Is that not a positive step forward?
Unfortunately, listening to all this, it's like someone who's so well versed in the course of the Nile. He knows that with all the eddy currents and the twists and turns, that he finds it difficult to reach the conclusion that the river actually flows from south to north. and so you know, we're watching all these small changes and nuances. Which part of they want to kill us are people having difficulty grasping?
All right. Well, it's kind of hard to follow that, but let's try with our good word, our silver lining. What do you think the silver lining of the show with either of our two subjects might be?
The Palestinian threat towards Israel is a combination of desire to harm Israel and the capacity to do so. And Israel has dealt with capacity all the time and did nothing to deal with the desire to harm us. I think it is now high time for us to take a look at that. And this is an opportunity. If this reconciliation solidifies and it becomes real, and Hamas is handing over to Abbas a green light to negotiate on behalf of Palestine as a whole, I think we should give it a chance.
Well, my so-called silver lining would be precisely the opposite. Right. I would hope that as the negotiations carry on, the futility of trying to reach an administrative unit that would accept Israel as a nation state of the Jewish people will be exposed as a farce. Sorry to be so pessimistically optimistic.
Yeah. All right, that's a tough silver lining. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today for this edition of ILTV's Israel Weekly. Thanks again to our guests, Ambassador Baruch and Dr. Sherman. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. See you next week, and shalom from Israel.